Glad that you're here tonight. Appreciate you coming out on a rainy night. I told Randy to stay in tonight. Getting here into the nuts and bolts of our salvation and some of the technical language, it's like reading the instructions. It's really not all that necessary. Our salvation is something that God does it all. All we have to do is plug it in and let Him plug it in, and it runs. It goes. Crank it and it starts, I guess. You let Him crank it and it starts. But it's important to see the processes or what God had to do and why God did what He had to do in order to be able to save us. And it's, you know, you and I just say, don't worry about it, or we say, forget about it, or never mind. But God believes in order and not in chaos and calamity. There's plenty of chaos and calamity out there. But one of the things that He does is He brings it all into order. And He can, and He does. In chapter 3, he started saying, well, you know, what about Judaism then? The Hebrew people, what? Paul said, he had already explained, and evidently the Roman Christians had kind of gotten their history lesson that God created the world. He created Adam and Eve. Then later, I saw a great division in the book of Genesis. Is the first 11 chapters are the beginnings of the human race. And since it's alliterated, it says from chapter 12 on to chapter 51, it was the beginnings of the Hebrew race. Beginnings of the human race, beginnings of the Hebrew race. So it's not that God was looking for Jewish people, it's that God was just looking, in His plan, there needed to be someone to be the first member of a family. And this is a very powerful point when witnessing to Jewish people. Yes, your people are the chosen people of God, the children of God, but why? You know, and you'll find that like all human beings do, many Jewish people feel like, well, we're just smarter than everybody else. We're better than everybody else. God loves us more, and we're special. Well, the fact of the matter is that's just not the case. They're just normal, ordinary human beings. And God chose one of them. And he wasn't Jewish. He didn't know what a Jew was. He didn't know what a Hebrew was. As a matter of fact, in his lineage, if you look in the book of Genesis, there was a member of the lineage of the early men there. One of them was called Eber. And many people believe that's where the word Eberus came from. The Eber people. Eber, we don't know anything at all about him, or why they might have been called Eberus. God needed a human family. And from all indications, we get the impression through the writings of the other Old Testament prophets and so forth that God was planning to send a very special person who was to be His anointed one. It's specially chosen. That's what the word Christ or Messiah means. That's why they picked out people, priests, kings. They would anoint them. It was a ceremony that said, you know, it was a way of saluting them or acknowledging them. It was a way of demonstrating that the Spirit of God was on this person. This is someone God told me to designate. That person was going to come through the Jewish line. And it makes the story of Jesus, it paves the way for the story of Jesus. Now, so that's chapter 3 of Romans. He says, well, you know, being Jewish, being of a certain nationality, a certain tribe, a certain religion, a certain group of people. He says, well, let's make it a little more specific than that. We do that in chapter 4 of Romans. What about the main guy, the number one? What about just that one person? What was special about being him? And so he does. He says, what shall we say then that Abraham our father is returning the flesh found? So he says, okay. He said, that's a really big thing to look at. This very logically minded, Paul is presenting an argument here, a position. And he says, okay. So he says, yes, there was a tremendous advantage for being Jewish. They had the law, and God was doing things in their midst, and they were learning about God, and they could, they were like on a stage, and the whole world was observing what God is doing, particularly through these people. So yeah, and it's a great responsibility. They had the law. But, he says, when it came right down to it, they were just like the conveyors through which God's goodness came to us. And they had to partake of it as well. So what about Abraham? Let's really make it narrow. The very first one, Father Abraham. Father Abraham. Just he says concerning the flesh, in other words, just as a human being. For if Abraham was justified by works, he hath whereof the glory, but not before God. He said, now Abraham was a good person. And if he was going to brag amongst people, if it was just me and you, Abraham's got something to brag about. He's a good person. He might be a better person than you. But he said, not before God. You can't come before God and say, I'm a really good person. God will say, no, you're not. You're just ordinary. You're just ordinary. For what does the Scripture say? Abraham believed God, and it was counted unto him in righteousness. Now, we don't know too much about dates and times here as far as specifics. But we can mark that in view of Revelation. So that verse is a quotation from Genesis 15. Genesis 15. So mark that as kind of, if we're looking at things in a progressive nature, he says that Abraham believed God. And it was counted unto him for righteousness. Now, when you and I think of counting, or Avery and Addison were thinking of counting, they might think of their numbers and doing their lessons and drawing their figures. But when he used this word, I tell you what, when he used the word counting there, it'd be the same if he was talking to us and he used the word accounting. Accounting. Because the word that he used is a word that technically is found in other writings about finance and about money and about ledgers and keeping data and information. He says, Abraham believed God, and it was like God was keeping an account. It was accounted to him or counted for him. In other words, God is looking and he says, okay, in this column, Abraham believed God. Over this column, God stamped it or wrote it in, righteous. Righteous. And the word righteous, here Paul is dealing with these kinds of words. And righteous, back in the 60s and early 70s, people picked that up. Picked up on that. That was a part of the religious terminology. And we began to listen to music or participate in a particular event that was enjoyable. We'd say, that was righteous. But less technically, it just means right. This is the way it's supposed to be, right. We see it cast as a religious word, but it's a word which means God looked at Abraham and said, okay, we're going to, they started doing this a little bit when I was in high school in my junior and senior year. I'd never heard of it. I suspect since Alabama was a little bit behind the times that it was just filtering down into the South and to us. But I began to see it quite frequently in college. Very magnanimous teachers or professors, and they had a class, and they would give a test. And then, let's say, and their test is always pretty thorough, and generally speaking, you might have a very difficult subject where the highest score on the test was 80. 80 was the best score. When you get, I thought, 80, you know what 80 was in high school? It was a B. You know what it is in college?
C.
It's a C or a close D. But the teacher, he said, we're going to grade this test on the curve. And we're going to let 80 be like 100. And so if you made like 79, it'd be like 99. I said, okay. But it was more than that. God was saying, Abraham, because, not because of you, that's the wrong terminology, but using you as an example, anybody who believes me is going to make 100 on this test. We're not just grading on the curve so that it helps everybody look better. You know what? Speaking about that, you always had one of those nerds. You know what I'm talking about? Yeah. And he would knock the top out of the curve. He'd make like 99, like that. You just want to drag him out and kill him. So everybody had to make 99 was 100. And sometimes he'd make 100 or 102. How can you do that? But the classes I was in, most of them were just average, and so somebody might make a 75 or an 80. I'm not sure that is conducive to doing your best. I think you're just thinking, let's all be sorry and we'll be fine. None of us study, we'll all be okay. And I think the educational philosophers are thinking, it ain't working the way I thought it might. But anyway, here, it's not because, and sometimes I've heard someone say, it's because Abraham offered Isaac that God said, hey, he offered his son, I'll offer my son. Oh, no. If Abraham had just absolutely, completely refused to offer his son, God would have then said, well, you didn't offer your son, but I'm going to offer mine because it's just got to be done. God never does anything because we do something. We got to respond to him, not him to us. Abraham believed God. And that Genesis 15, make a mark there. We don't know where that is chronologically or in time, but we do know it's before something else. We'll see that in a minute. Now to him that worketh is the reward, not reckoned of grace, but of debt. Well, why did he do that, he's saying? Why did he do that? Well, he owed it. He was just paying a bill. We can't really brag about something. He was just doing what he had to do, what he was supposed to do, what he was required to do. It's not of grace, it's a debt. He just owed that. But to him that worketh not, but believes on him that justifieth him godly, his faith is counted for righteousness. It's like that story of Jesus talking about people would come. He was going to pay people to go out and work for him for a day. He says, work for me all day for a penny. And the next group came in like at 8 o'clock. He says, go out in the field, I'll pay you a penny at the end of the day. And he did that, and even some people showed up at 5, 6 o'clock that afternoon, that evening. He says, go out there and I'll pay you. And at the end of the day, he paid everybody a penny. And the ones that had been there since sunup said, hey, these guys only worked an hour or two, and they got the same pay and on the field. Said, hey, I negotiated with everybody. And it's my money. I pay them whatever I want to pay them. Didn't you and I say a penny? He said, yeah, it's okay. And God says, you might have messed up. You might not be a good person. Maybe you're not as good as Abraham. Maybe just in desperation and in hope, you believe in God. Stand. Boom. Righteous. Paul is saying, God can do that. It's his field. It's his money. It's grace, he said in the previous verse. This is just grace. He said, okay, I'm just handing it out. But to him that worketh not, but believeth on him that justifieth him, God is counted as righteousness. Even as David also described the blessedness of the man unto whom God imputeth righteousness without works. He's quoting from one of the Psalms. Now there's a word right there that he pops out in. We've already looked at righteousness. And here's justified. We're picking a box. He's getting into high gear in chapter 4. And he's pulling out the theological dictionary. Justified. Righteousness is where God makes you right, and justification is where, like, God takes you where you're brought into court and God makes it legal. You know, righteousness is where God brings you into His family, and then justified is where He adopts you. He makes it, He gives you the certification. He gives you the documentation, the birth certificate, justified. So and now here He says in verse 6. about imputing. And he says this whole process is where to impute just means it comes from God to us. He just takes it and pops it. He just lays it there. He's not paying you. And he used the word reward right there. He says, no, I'm not talking about a reward. He says he imputes it to you. It's another technical kind of word that we don't use very much. Say, blessed are those whose iniquities are forgiven, whose sins are covered. Blessed is the man to whom the Lord will not impute sin. Now, he's already dealt with it. In chapter 3, he says that we've all sinned. So he can't say, well, that's good for the sinners. No, it's good for everybody. And it's a blessing where God doesn't impute sin to you, but he imputes righteousness. Cometh this blessedness then upon the circumcision only, or upon the uncircumcision also? Circumcision is always so difficult to deal with from the pulpit and in the church. It's just, you can't talk about it much. You just have to assume that everybody goes home and figures it all out. Or maybe they've studied it somewhere, or they are aware of this religious significance of this ceremony that is performed upon males when they're 8 days old, or sometimes in modern times to newborns. How is it reckoned? And here again, it's another. All of these words are legal terms, are terms that have to do with legal monetary transactions. Reckoning. I don't know how that became such a deeply ingrained Southern word. We reckon about a lot of stuff, don't we? You go in the store? I reckon so. I reckon so. Reckon. There's a line in Tombstone. If you've never have watched Tombstone, it's a fictional telling of Wyatt Earp and Doc Holliday and that bunch in Tombstone. The gunfight at the OK Corral. I like Val Kilmer, who plays Doc Holliday. And somebody's talking about, man, Wyatt Earp's just going on tear, man. And he's cleaning up the West. He's after the Red Rag group. And one guy said, just kind of spits it out of his mouth. He just eat up with revenge. Doc Holliday said, oh, no, sir. So it's not about revenge. It's about a reckoning. It's about a reckoning. That means answering. A time of justice and judgment. A time when you got to stand up and you got to own it. You got to buy it. You got to have it. It's yours. It's at your feet. It's a reckoning. How is it reckoned? Jethro would say, how did he cipher it out? how did he do that math? He was saying, his way of saying is, that don't add up. You know how God is cooking the books. He's cheating. Yeah, he is. He's saying, come on, just forgive all your sins. And I'm going to say, you're right, and we're going to take it to court. We're going to get you to justify it. We're going to make sure it's legal. And we're not going to impute any sins to. We're going to impute righteousness to. And Paul says, how do you reckon he does that? How does he reckon that? He said, it must be something you did it must be something. And he just always reaches back to the most glaring, kind of obvious, the thing that evidently the Jewish people, it made them different than most every other people in the world. Circumcision. All you had to do was, almost anywhere else in the world, if you were a man, is go to the public baths and say, oh, he's not like us. Though circumcision was not invented for Abraham, it was something that Abraham had already heard of when God asked him to do that. When he was in circumcision or uncircumcision. And he says, not in circumcision, but in uncircumcision. That's why I say we don't have a calendar. But in Genesis 15 it says Abraham believed God, and God counted it as righteousness. In chapter 17 is when God was speaking to Abraham again. And he says, here's something else. I want all the males that live in your household to be circumcised. So he believed God, counted righteousness. That's what he's saying right here in chapter 15. And later on, we don't know how long later on, but later on in chapter 17 is the only time that circumcision was mentioned. And so he says, no. He says, it wasn't. If you think that's the most unique and strange and unusual thing that the Hebrew people did or that Abraham did, if you think that that's what made him okay in the sight of God, he says, you're wrong. Because Abraham believed God, and God counted it as righteousness for him even before Abraham was circumcised. And he received the sign of circumcision, the seal of the righteousness of faith, which he had yet being uncircumcised, that he might be the father of all that believe. You see, Abraham is not, this is something. And he's saying this, and this is where Paul would get thrown out of the synagogue. Look at what he's saying right here in Romans. Abraham is not the father of all the circumcised. In other words, he's not the father of all the Jews. What does Paul here say that Abraham is the father of? All who believe. He's the father of all who believe. And the Jews say, well, I'm a Jew because I'm circumcised and I'm of the seed of Abraham. And he says he's not just the father of the Jewish people, not just the father of the circumcised, not just the father of the Hebrew nation. He's the father, the spiritual father of everyone who would ever believe. And that is Abraham's, that is his note in history, his great place of honor. And the father of circumcision to them who are not of circumcision only, but who also walk in the steps of that faith of our father Abraham, which he had being yet uncircumcised. He wasn't circumcised, did he? The father of our faith. For the promise that he should be the heir of the world was not to Abraham or to his seed through the law, but through the righteousness of faith. He says, okay, now, circumcision was before the Mosaic law. But when God, in chapter 17 of Genesis, told Abraham, get all my name straight, he told Abraham to be circumcised and all the males in his family. It was passed as a law. It was a commandment. He says it was before the law. He says, but through the righteousness of faith. For if they were of the law be heirs, faith is made void. In other words, he says, if you get what God is offering by inheriting it through bloodline, says it's not faith. If you're righteous because you're Isaac, he said that's not faith. Just simply because Abraham's your daddy. He says, and the promise is made of none effect because the law works wrath. For where no law is, there is no transgression. You know when Cain killed Abel? Abel carried on. Cain, I'm not getting my names right tonight. I'm catching them, but as they're coming out of my mouth, they're wrong. Cain whined and carried on because he said, oh, my punishment is more harsh than I can stand. God sent him out of town. You kidding? He just exiled him. He says, no, you can't stay here. You got to go away. The fact of the matter is, when you send your child to their room without supper, you're not punishing them. You're doing that instead of punishing them. You see? When you go tell a kid to sit in the corner, you're not punishing them. You're doing that. When you're giving them a timeout, that's a problem with a lot of modern child psychology. When you tell a child to sit in the corner, they're not being punished. They're having to sit in the corner instead of being punished. He says, if there's not any law, do you know there wasn't a law when Cain killed Abel? There wasn't a law that says don't kill your brother with a rock. Remember that little thing from so many years ago from a comedy show that a little girl was being punished, and she said, well, they told me not to go outside, and I didn't go outside. They told me not to draw on the wall. I didn't draw on the wall, and they told me not to spill my food. I didn't spill my food, but they didn't tell me not to shave the cat. They didn't tell me not to shave the cat. So God had never said, don't kill your brother now. And this was like, that's what Mama said to me every day when she sent us out of the house. Don't kill your brother. She never told him, though, and then he whacked me with a 2-4 when I wasn't even looking. Shot me with the arrow. I threw a dart in the back of my leg. Go back to Mom and say, hey, tell him not to kill me either. I'm under strict orders here. You know what? You read the story of Cain and Abel again. Do you remember a guy named Lamech? Came right after that, right after Cain killed Abel. And Cain was sent off, and he said, oh, you've been too hard on me. There's a guy named Lamech, and he says, I killed a guy. He said, I killed 2 guys. And since Cain just kind of walked away free, I figure I'm in the clear too. That's in the book of Genesis. You know why? Because there wasn't any law that said, thou shalt not kill. It wasn't against the law to kill people. And Lamech picked up on it. And he says, the law brings wrath. Where there's no law, there's no transgression. Therefore, it is a faith that it might be by grace. To the end of the promise might be sure to all the seed, not only that which is the law, but that which is of the faith of Abraham, who is the father of us all. Even you Romans. As it is written, I have made thee a father of many nations. Before him whom he believed, even God, who quickeneth the dead, and calls those things which are not as though they were. You see, he's cooking the books. Call those things which are not as though they were. Paul says, you know what? God just sits back and he says, okay, you're good people. You're right. You're justified. You're my children. You're my family. You're righteous. And then we say, yeah, but we're not. And God says, I'm just making what is not what is. Things which be, those things which be not as though they were. God says, I'm just going to pretend everything's okay because of your faith. And when God pretends, it's real. Who against hope believed in hope, that he might become the father of many nations, according to that which was spoken, so shall thy seed be. Talking about Abraham. And being not weak in faith, he considered not his own body, now dead. You got to be able to appreciate that verse. His body, now dead. You find out that you were dead a long time before they buried you. I'm dead. When he was about 100 years old, Lord have mercy. I don't want to be 100 years old. There's probably some of you here that say, I'd like to be 100. I don't want to be 100 years old. I want to make it. I've always heard my dad say, we'll make a good corpse. He did. He was all dressed up in his black suit and his red tie. Look, real natural. He was 100 years old. Neither yet the deadness of Sarah's womb. Well, if you're just going to add insult to injury, just go ahead. About her dead womb. That's probably what they call it. A dead old man, a dead old woman. That's what 100-year-old people do. He staggered not at the promise of God through unbelief. You know, if I was 100 years old and I thought I might have a baby, I'd do more than stagger. I'd fall flat down. I'd just pass out. I'd say, oh, no. No, it can't work. But was strong in faith, giving glory to God. My goodness, isn't it? We tell that because we just think that's a story. That's a story from the Bible. If that's a real story, if that really happened, we just kind of tell it Sunday school like Abraham, and Abraham was 100 years old when Isaac was born. We tell it like, and the kids are coloring and say, yeah. One of these days, one of the little kids is going to look up and say, what? Huh? Is that a story? What is that? He said, if that's a real story, that is amazing. And it's not even It's not something you say, well, it could happen. No, it couldn't possibly happen, but it did. And being fully persuaded that what he had been promised, he was able also to perform, and therefore it was imputed to him for righteousness. Not to be indelicate, but Abraham and Sarah didn't just have to be miraculously capable of providing DNA. They had to feel a little frisky too, and that's probably the biggest miracle of all. And when Abraham said, hey baby, how you doing? She said, get away, old man. And you know what? You just wondered. And that's really what that last verse is about. Being fully persuaded that what he had promised, he was able to also, he says, so he's still got to have relations in his wife, or having relations. And we don't, that's probably the first time you've ever heard that sermon. And therefore it was imputed to him for righteousness. Now it was not written for his sake alone that it was imputed to him. He said, well, it's not just for Abraham, but for us also, to whom it shall be imputed, if we believe on him that raised up Jesus from the dead, who was delivered for our offenses and was raised again for our justification. You see, he died for us, and that was what made us righteous. But when God raised him, that's when he took it into court and certified justification, where it said, we're making it legal now. Jesus is going to rise from the dead, which means, he says, I'm just going to pretend your sins are all gone, and to prove that I have the authority to do that. He said, Jesus was always doing that. They'd come to him and say, hey, you can't say that. And Jesus would say, well, is it easier to say this or to do this? Is it easier to do this or to do that? It stumped them every time. And they would say, well, if you could do that, and you probably say anything you want to. And that's what he's saying right here. He says, Jesus died for our offenses. And then he said, I'm going to raise from the dead. And that'll prove to everybody that not only did I do it, but I can do it. Maybe I should say that backwards. Not only can I do it, but I did do it. And all of my theological life, I've heard people flail away and try to attack the resurrection of Jesus, that Jesus is alive. You know what? It's been 2,000 years, and they don't have anything new yet. They're still using the same old stuff that they were using on Sunday. On Easter Sunday, they're still using, he was just passed out. He was swooned. The disciples stole his body. Yeah, that's it. Is that all y'all got? Is that all y'all got? Last year sometime, it was something that Andy Stanley said, on a Wednesday night session that really impacted me, that never had hit me before like this. And it just resonates in my mind and in my heart. That the disciples of Jesus were, there is Christianity today. The church exists today. The Bible exists because of those men who followed Jesus. And we're talking about the faith of Abraham here, but the faith of the disciples was not all that profound. It was not. There were so many times when Jesus just said, oh man, what's wrong with you? Come on, y'all. He said, come on, get caught up. And then after, he said, and then they believed in him. And so Jesus said, now you believe? Andy Stanley said, they didn't have a Bible. James and John, Matthew, they didn't have a Bible. They had the Old Testament scriptures, but they didn't have the story of Jesus in written form. And they heard the teachings of Jesus. But we can see that even when Jesus rose from the dead, that they didn't remember that part of what he had said. They were really weak on remembering. That's why Jesus told them in John's Gospel, chapter 16, he said, the Holy Spirit's going to have to help you remember what I said to you. And he will. But Andy Stanley said they didn't believe because of what they heard Jesus teach and because of the teachings and the authority of Jesus. And he says they believe because of what they saw. They saw something. They saw something. One of the last scenes in the movie Risen, the Roman centurion is trying desperately to make his transition. He's doing everything. He's trying to keep up with God, and God's leading him along. But finally, he meets the risen Lord. He meets Jesus. He saw Jesus hanging on the cross. In the movie, he's not there present when Jesus is crucified, but it was his detail that did it. It was his detail that crucified Jesus. But now he's lit out. He's looking for Jesus. Imagine that. He took off. He left. He put his armor behind. He left to quit his commission. He was gone absent without leave. He left Jerusalem. Why would he even look? Why would he even go? All because, according to the movie, he had already seen Jesus, or thought he did, up in that upper room. That's a wonderful scene. He's looking around. He's tracking. You got to lead. He's found the disciples. He's caught them. And there they are. He's looking. And he's looking at them. They're all here. How stupid. And he passes Jesus, and he goes over here and he goes, "What? Wait a minute. There's Jesus is sitting there." And everything else goes out the window. Everything else goes out the window. But one of the last scenes is they're there on the seashore, and Jesus just fed them, and that whole story. And the centurion looks at Peter and he says, this whole thing, why? And about that time over, and kind of in the background, some people bring up a young man, and he's possessed by an evil spirit. And Jesus goes over to him, kneels down beside him, puts his hands on him, and just loves on him. And takes that young man and stands him up. And he just kind of walks away. That young man walks away just like a normal, ordinary human being. And Peter looks at the centurion and says, That's why right there. That's why we saw him do this. And humanly speaking, I have pagan friends. I have unbelieving friends. You know what they like to do? They like to find something that Confucius said, or something that some other ancient religion wrote on the wall, like 1,000 years before Jesus. And I said, everything that came out of Jesus' mouth wasn't something brand new. It wasn't Jesus was talking to Nicodemus about the new birth. He said, Nicodemus, how can you be a leader in Israel and you never heard this before? You've never heard about being born again. I'm not making this up, Jesus. This is not new stuff. The reason Jesus' teaching was so outlandish to the people of his day is because it's not what the Pharisees were teaching. It's not what the Pharisees were teaching, but it was what the Bible was teaching. Yeah, they're like loving your neighbor and loving God, and the golden rule, like doing to others as you'd have them doing to you. That is not new. That is not uniquely Jesus. There have been people who have said that thousands of years before Jesus. It's all true, and it's good stuff, and Jesus said it, there's no doubt. But of all that's put together, the only thing that possibly explains why Christianity is still ravaging the world and spreading like fire is because the people who knew Jesus saw him die, and then they saw him alive. And they could not deny that. They could never deny that. I've been to the tomb of St. Thomas. It's not in the Bible. It doesn't say where Thomas went after Pentecost and all that. But in the city of Madras, it's now called Chennai, there is a church, a Catholic church, and you can go there, and they have the body of Thomas, the disciple, the apostle of Jesus. The tradition says that he was slain there, he was speared. He was pierced with spears because of his spreading of the gospel, the story of Jesus, to there. I think it's a modern affectation. Let me just kind of warn you. When you get to heaven, don't walk up to him and say, "Doubting Thomas." Thomas did doubt. I just don't believe it. But when Jesus came to him and he said, "Thomas, touch my hands. Reach hither your finger and touch the wound in my side. Be not doubtless, but believing." Kind of a bum rap. Because from that moment on, Thomas, the disciple, the apostle of Jesus, never doubted again. Never. And they said, "Deny him. We want you to shut up. You can't talk about Jesus." Thomas said, No, I believe. We don't know. I don't know. But you know what I believe the last thing Thomas said was? "My Lord and my God." My Lord and my God. They saw something. They saw something. They didn't always believe. They didn't always have faith. Sometimes they failed. Sometimes they doubted. Sometimes they were afraid. They saw something. They saw something. It changed the world. It changed the world. Let me pray for you tonight.